So it was a time of questioning, a time that gave rise to some of the world's greatest teachers, including Sid, the Buddha, and the founder of the Jains as well, Mahavira. And it was about in the contemporary period of Confucius, Chinese philosophers. So this is a time when thousands of seekers and wandering philosophers and ascetics examined the meaning of life, the possibilities of what it meant to be human. These seekers were lively, and they had conversation, and they passed on what they were practicing through word of mouth when they would meet up with each other. And it was called the sramanic stream. Sramanas means literally to strive, or the striver. And these Indian sramanas were kind of practical mystics who had become disillusioned of their life out there, the Vedic life. And they decided that it was important for them to challenge the status quo, to challenge the hierarchical caste system, for instance, of that society. And they were seeking a state of living liberation, or the soul awake in this lifetime. And in order to do this, they turned to those who were practicing and teaching about yoga, to these teachers who taught that realization of the true self could be developed, but not through external religious rituals, which was kind of the mainstream then, perhaps now, but through direct and persistent inner investigation of the body and the mind, and the breath flowing through and between. The best of these teachers insisted upon the power of self-reliance, self-examination, and self-development. So these strivers, practitioners of yoga, the shramanas, they dedicated their lives to this psychological and spiritual examination, to the science of experimentation and the recording of the outcomes. They practiced in both small groups and in solitude, living quietly at the edge of the mainstream society, in caves or in forests. These seekers rejected doctrine and dogma, did not particularly favor codification or codification of their ideas and practices, and for this reason it was a long time before the results of their experimentation practices were ever recorded for our benefit 2,000 years later. So this growing body of wisdom was passed along primarily by word of mouth for 1,000 years. In its earliest stages, much of the strivers' experimentation might have been highly shamanistic, concerned with what we might even call magic, black, white, or otherwise. Some of their work over the hundreds of years, and with the efforts of thousands of highly motivated seekers, made in discovering a reliable path to being a fully alive human being, and to connect with a sense of what you are, not who you are or what you do, but what you are. Part of this, as James Baldwin would say, amazing and yet disastrous, awesome and yet disastrous at the same time, human family. At some point, the tradition became known as yoga, a word that literally means to connect, to bind, to bring into union, and that its practitioners became known as yogis, although I'm going to start to bring back the term shramana, the idea of striving to connect, action of attempting to strive. That is the link to this practice becoming something that becomes part of our lives. So the text that was produced by a mysterious sage, otherwise known as Patanjali, became known as, that was the text that was produced that recorded all of this activity and experimentation research over this age, was called the Yoga Sutras. And it has stood for about 2,000 years as sort of the definitive statement about the philosophy and the practice of yoga. And that the shramanas recognized was that the human being is kind of caught. And unless the human being does something about it, then we are caught in this web of delusion. And that the web is rather tenacious to grab a hold of and to actually see, to view, without being persistent studies. And that extracting ourselves from this web of delusion is a very complex process. So the yogis called the extraction process, extracting oneself from the web of delusion, introversion. And it's difficult for us to practice it and to engage in introspection, because what they found is that we don't actually have the skill to do that. So I invite you to come to take a seat, to put on your striver cap and enter into this practice as something that is out of the ordinary, not your ordinary day-to-day kind of experience. Coming to, as Martin Luther King Jr. coined, coming into this more your inner realm that your yoga practice will bring you into, and seeing that as a very special, if not sacred, space within. And then striving to even catch a glimpse that looking within is where you will find the source of all happiness. The source of all happiness is within.